Folks, welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. Today, I am going to be talking about a topic that shouldn't be controversial, but every single time it comes up, there always seems to be controversy about it, which is allowing our elections to be fair. And it doesn't matter what side you're on. There have been point in times that I've been listening going all the way back to the 2000 election where people have accused elections of not being fair. And even really, if you look back in history, going back into the 1960s presidential election, and we know back in the 1800s with the different boss systems that there probably was not fair elections at that point in time too. But for some reason now it has become this controversy that you're not allowed to talk about it. But I'm here with Marly Hornik and to discuss this. And so, Marly, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Peter. It's an honor to be on, and thanks for all your listeners for giving me a fair shot.
Well, and that's really kind of like the basis of everything you're wanting to do, right? Is just kind of create a fair shot, right?
Yes, it should be normal, honestly. It should be normal to sit down at the table and hear each other out and see if there's an increase in wisdom through multiple perspectives coming and sitting down and getting expressed, and maybe we could come to a real solution that way. Hey.
So how did you get involved in it? What was it that with fair elections? Like when you woke up one morning and was like, I can't take this anymore, or was it a period over a period of time? Like what made you say, okay, this is gonna be a hill that I need to start to climb?
Actually, I'm a prepper, and I had been preparing for the worst case scenario, probably, let's just say something along those lines for 10 years at least. I have a farm, and my family here, I homeschool my children. I gave birth to them at home. We raise we have dairy goats here. We have our own food, our own gardens. We make medicines. We do all these things because basically, first of all, because we love to, and second of all, because we didn't want to be dependent on the system if the system came down. So it's something I've been conscious of for quite a while. Now, after the 2020 election, like so many Americans, I sat thinking, wow, look at all this video, look at all this obvious, shenanigans, obvious misconduct. Someone's going to fix this. I didn't have a particular idea about who was winning in one state or another. It's not that I thought, this absolutely clearly is incorrect. It was just that there were crimes that were not being investigated properly. And that's not how America is supposed to run. And that was what really made me want to get involved. And I did it was all the way over into 2021, in July of 2021, that I started the process of founding New York Citizens Audit, which became a massive organization in New York. We still have over 2,000 active volunteers in the state working on communicating with officials about our findings, working on research and analytics, working on public relations, communications, all of these different aspects, because it's nearly impossible, as you alluded to get a fair hearing with officials or in the media. It's like the idea is that if you mention the word elections, you're a denier, but our evidence and our facts and findings show that we've actually been denied valid elections for at least 2 cycles and perhaps longer.
So when you're saying denied fair elections, give me like what do you see are probably like the top three things that are preventing elections from being unfair?
Well, the main reason that I make the claim that an election would not be valid is because it doesn't follow the law. So an election is inherently an adversarial environment. You could call it a zero trust system. That's what they call it in cyber parlance, right? When you cannot trust anyone outside of your own self. And you don't have any reason to, right? If you're a candidate for public office, there's a tremendous amount of money and power on the line. You have no reason to trust your adversary, and they have a good reason not to trust you. How is it that everyone ends up at peace and in harmony with the outcome that's stated by the election officials? The election officials have one job and one job only, and this was defined actually in 1888, going back that far by the Supreme Court, which is this particular ruling is still considered good law. It says the election officials have to adhere absolutely unwaveringly to the policies and procedures that define every step of election administration. So if the law says there has to be a chain of custody that follows the ballot from the voter's hand all the way through to the count and all the way through to the locked storage where those items, all those auditable items are kept under security, under lock and key for 2 years, so they could be reviewed, then that every single ballot has to have that. If the law says every single person who registers to vote has to meet these qualifications, they have to be, 18, or, they have to be at this address, depending on what the state says, and they have to be a US citizen, then every single person handed a ballot has to meet those qualifications exactly before and the officials have to know. So in Coy, they said, if an official wavers from that tightrope between the two adversarial parties, there's only one reason.
Okay,
And that's
so
because when an official makes that choice, they are disrupting continuity of governance. They're disrupting quiet enjoyment of life's blessings. They are disrupting all of the reasons identified in the first sentence of the US Constitution, the We the People preamble, about why we made this country in the first place. It's all up in arms, because the essential peace treaty of America, the Constitution, has been abridged.
okay, so if and we're seeing a trend on this now, when they start allowing um the law passes, because if we're basing everything that a fair election is based off of what the law is, and if they're passing laws that render things to be unfair in a way, such as back in 2020, such as the Mark Zuckerberg ballot boxes, or even when they say no photo ID. I mean, there has been, I know in several states recently, there's been large numbers of people registering to vote that have no photo ID. At that point in time, technically the law is being followed, but I would argue that's still not a fair election. Would you agree with that? Would you, or would you still maintain that the law is trumps kind of the more of a higher premise of what fairness is?
Well, it depends on which law you're reading, you see, and this is where a lot of this mess comes up, right? If you try to understand elections from social media, you end up entangled in this horrific Gordian knot, right? But you have to
You try
go
to
and actually.
understand anything with social media, you're gonna be
True. I completely agree. And I think that's quite deliberate. But the point is, you have to go back to the original laws. So the third sentence of the United States Constitution says the people of the several states shall choose their representatives. So that is truly the law, right? The third, you can't even complete writing Article 1 before you establish the principle in the United States of America of government by consent. That is our philosophical basis for our existence, is that we are not going to be subjected to laws that we ourselves did not approve. Now, you can have laws ensuing from that, but that is the philosophical principle that all of these other laws must adhere to. Now, in the 14th Amendment, there's a secondary requirement that's created in Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. It says that when a state, it doesn't define a voter, but it reverse defines a voter by creating a consequence. When a state abridges, when it denies or abridges in any way the right to vote of its eligible citizen voters, and again, eligibility is defined at the federal level only by age, and then everything else is defined by the state. But when a state abridges those particular voters, the eligible citizen ones, that state loses apportionment. They lose federal funds, they lose congressional representation, and they lose electoral college votes. So you have to go to those two. There's a hierarchy of law, right? Just because a bunch of bureaucrats decided that it's okay, that the law is now going to be, that if someone registers to vote through the DMV, consider their identity validated. That doesn't actually give them the authority to override the fundamental principle of the United States of America. They have to know their voter. Just like in banking, you have to know your customer, KYC laws, right? You don't give a loan to someone whose identity you're not certain of because you may never see that money again, right? It's just normal in every other instance.
So I'm gonna rat out my mother, but she's dead, so it's gonna be okay. But when
It's wrong.
when my grandmother was, or I'm sorry, my grandfather, he was still alive, but he was really, for lack of a better term, he was pretty incapacitated. She filled out his absentee ballot based off of who she wanted to vote for. So technically, that election, and I don't remember if it was a presidential election or local. I don't remember what it was, but I remember having this conversation with her, and I wasn't old enough to vote, so it might as well have been my vote at the same time. But she was able to do that. At that point in time, clearly they did not know that who was really casting that vote. I would argue that what she did was wrong, even though I'm certain that she's not the only one who's ever done anything like that. Um, but absentee voting prevents people from knowing who it is that's voting. So again, going back to what you're saying, allowing that, because because the absentee voting, I think, kind of helped people spur along, and I'm going to take the Dominion voting machine mess out of it, but I want to talk about kind of more of the ballot stuffing that was going on. Absentee voting seems to be a loophole in allowing this from taking place. So how do you allow absentee voting, but also not, but also know who your voter is? Like, how does that work?
Well, it is possible. I'm not saying it's easy, and it certainly was never envisioned as a mass kind of a voting process that this would be acceptable on a broad scale. It was meant to be exclusively for circumstances where the voter really was not able to participate in person. Um, but actually, the definition of a mail-in ballot has simply changed, just like the definition of
Really?
your sex. Okay, I'm not even going to call it gender, it's your sex has changed. So in 2002, in the Help America Vote Act, the definition of a ballot received by mail was one that contained a certified copy or an original document that demonstrated your identity, and it had a chain of custody. You don't just drop it in a ballot box anonymously. The only aspect of our voting system that was ever designed to be anonymous was the ballot itself. Everything else is not supposed to be anonymous. We're supposed to know who's doing everything. That's part of a zero trust system, is the idea that every single voter is potentially an adversary. Like your dear mom, right? She decided to inject one fraudulent ballot into an election. So, to someone who wanted the other candidate to win, she's an adversary. We don't have to trust each other. We have to be able to trust the process. So how is it that the definition of a mail-in ballot got altered so that now we believe anything that arrives in an envelope is legitimate? It's not. That's not what the law says. But the issue is really how our electronic voting systems have allowed a, a totally new level of let's call it error, because it's not proven to be anything other than error at this point, has entered our system. Now, to be clear, just calling it error is enough. And that's part of what
You
United
said it
Sovereign
isn't. I'm
American,
sorry. Did you say it is enough?
it's
Okay.
enough. And I'll explain why. Because, and this is a critical part of the United Sovereign Americans research in state after state after state, and our claims and arguments, and already filed in federal court in the state of Maryland. as a preliminary injunction against the use of the voting system in Maryland for the 2024 election. Now, the reason is you have an instance. I'm going to talk about New York because that's right at the top of my mind always.
Right.
The first question we ask to figure out whether an election was valid is, was the voting list accurate? An election contains three essential elements. You can't have an election without these three things. It's voters, votes, and counts, right? If you take one of those things away, it's not an election, it's something else. So if your voter list is not accurate, if it has corrupted names or invalid names or fictitious names or invalid data, you already have a problem. It's inevitable that it's going to affect your votes and affect your counts. And Congress, under the necessary and proper clause, for over 100 years, 150 years, has been writing legislation and passing legislation that says the integrity of our federal elections couldn't be more important, because that's what upholds our government by consent. So the idea of accuracy in a voter list is not like, it's not up for grabs. There's no such thing as dirty voter rolls. There's crimes against the elective franchise contained inside of a voter list that is required under federal law to be accurate. So when we ask that first question, we say, were the voter rolls accurate, which is a requirement of the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. In New York, the New York State Voter Roll Database, 4 days after the 2022 midterm was certified, there were 5.1 million apparent violations of eligibility requirements or data validity in the database. Now we ask our second question. And just to be clear, these are things like people whose birth dates changed from one version of the database to another, or people whose statewide unique identifier changed from one version of the database to another. These are people with no address whatsoever on record. So how did anybody know what ballot to give them? You have no idea what election district they're in. How did you give them a ballot without an address? Never mind, it's required by law. It's a million people literally a million people registered to vote on January 1st when all federal offices are closed. So they want to wave a wand and say, oh, don't worry, that's nothing to see here. A million registration records with an invalid registration date. We know why that happened. And the reason you can't tell why that happened is because you're not an election official. That's the reason. Okay, fine. So they don't want to talk about it, let's just say. Number two, were any votes counted by records or registrations apparent voters who did not meet the eligibility requirements of the 14th Amendment? Well, in the 2022 midterm in New York, actually, there were 732,000 votes cast by these registrations that don't meet a provable standard of identity or eligibility under the law. That's a lot of dilution of qualified citizens' votes. Our third question, was the number of votes counted equal to the number of voters who voted? Seems like an easy reconciliation. I mean, if you don't reconcile your taxes and you file them, the IRS doesn't just say, that's okay, you did your best. That's not how we treat that. They call it perjury and they come after you. So in the 2022 election in New York, they counted 35,000 more votes than they have a record of a voter voting. So 35,000 ballots entered the system, ostensibly. No one has any idea where they came from, how they got there, and they don't track back to any voter, not even a fake one.
The Demas family has been in the restaurant business for many generations. We have been serving people in the Middle Tennessee market for 34 years. Try our spaghetti kits, our pot roast, which we slow cook for 4 hours, or our world famous baked chicken and rice soup, which many locals have dubbed Greek penicillin for when you feel under the weather. We make our food fresh, and upon placing our order with us, we freeze the order and send it to your house. Demas's is more than a business. 5 generations of restaurant operators have taught us many things about food, but more importantly, we have recognized that we don't sell food. We sell the experience of bringing people and families together, which our country desperately needs. So go to demasfamilykitchen.com and share in this journey today. And for right now, use the code UNCOMMON to get 10% off of your order. That's demasfamilykitchen.com. Okay, so in order to have a fake voter, I mean, and again, I get the names on the list. You know, you can have pet names on the list. You get the people that you know that are dead on the list. I mean, who knows if my mother's still alive? Maybe my grandfather would still be voting. I don't, I don't know. You know, so I know those things kind of happen there. But when then you've got the people out there that are casting votes. That second group you're talking about, they're casting votes that that don't have the valid address and they're real people, but they aren't real voters, for lack of a better way to say it. They're not. What incentive do they have? I mean, personally, for me, I'd be scared to death. Like if I walked into a place to vote, or you know, and try to pretend like I'm somebody else, that would I would be too nervous to do it. Like I couldn't effectively do it. But if you're dealing with thousands and tens of thousands of people that are possibly doing this, what incentive do they have to do it? It's not like they're going to get elected. It's not like there's nepotism that all of a sudden I do this and all of a sudden I get a cushy government job. You know, so what incentive do they have?
Well, I actually would ask a different question.
Okay.
And this is the question that we're asking, which is, here's the thing. If you value your liberty and you value the unique opportunity in the United States of America to live according to the freedom of your own conscience given to you, granted to you through a miracle by your creator, not from your federal government, then the accuracy and validity of our elections couldn't be more important. That's why they're like a precious jewel.
Right.
And if you have a precious jewel in a museum or in some other, kind of place, you're going to surround that jewel with security systems. There's going to be, temperature and humidity sensors, laser beams, noise sensors, security guards, slamming steel doors. You are going to do everything in your power to make sure the jewel is there in the morning. And our election systems are similarly protected because they protect our fundamental right in the United States of America. So they're surrounded by this operational security boundary, this interwoven tapestry of federal and state laws that says basically, if you are a piece of data, if you're a piece of technology or any other aspect that's going to be used to administer our election, for the United States presidential office or for congressional or Senate offices, you are going to meet a stringent standard required by law before you can get through that boundary. The question is not whether or not 732,000 unique individuals in New York State took advantage of an opportunity to try to cast an extra or a fraudulent ballot. The question is, how did 5.1 million registration violations penetrate that operational security boundary? Because if the voter rolls weren't breached, we would like to know where exactly the problem lies, because they shouldn't be in there at all. There shouldn't be any opportunity for fraud, never mind 732,000 opportunities where potential fraud took place, whether it was on the part of the voter, whether it was on the part of some criminal enterprise, whether it was on the part of computer programmers who have back-end access. I don't know. I don't care. The law says they're not allowed to be in there. And you can't call it a clerical error when it happens 5.1 million times. That's simply unacceptable. That's a critical investigation, because the voter roll database is part of our national security infrastructure. I had a meeting back in 2022. I had the opportunity to sit down with the New York State Police Special Investigations Unit. And I had, let's see, they thought, oh, these these yahoos are going to come in and we're going to, give them a pat on the back and thank them for being good American citizens and send them home with a cup of coffee in 15 minutes. We had a nearly 3.5 hour meeting in which we demonstrated that the New York State voter roll database had likely been breached. So that's another topic, another investigative topic that New York Citizens Audit did. The point is, they said to us, wow, we're going to have to give this investigation over to the Foreign Intelligence Task Force of the FBI. They didn't say, wow, it looks like dirty voter rolls to us. They said, this is where this investigation has to go. And I asked them why. I said, why would you give it to the Foreign Intelligence Task Force? And they said, because when there is a breach or a potential breach of critical national security infrastructure, it is an assumption. There is an assumption from the outset that a foreign actor may be involved. So the idea that, that this amount of error inside of a voter roll database can be explained legitimately without, at a bare minimum, without an investigation is outrageous. And it's not how the law sees the matter. So the
Okay.
issue is like, you can run this little audit. I mean, it's not a little audit, frankly. It took tens of thousands of hours and it took 3 years. But you can use the voter roll database to examine the accuracy of an election from registration all the way through certification.
But I guess now, so it almost feels helpless. I'll be honest in listening to you. And the reason why I say that is because if we're not stopping people on the front end from doing it, and we have to kind of go be reactive and go after them criminally. But then the problem is, you're right, it takes you 3 years. Well, the election's already certified. We're already setting up for 1 or 2 more elections by the time you kind of deal with this one. And then at that point in time, many of the people who are involved in it are kind of doing the same thing over and over again, and without and the people who are going to be in charge of doing the investigation and filing things criminally are the people who got the benefit from the fraudulent election to begin with. So it seems like there's this circle that has to be that has to be breached at some point in time, but I don't see where that can be. I mean, the data is there, and to me, it's very clear. You give me those type of numbers. It's not like you're saying there were 74, illegal votes, and I'd be like, okay, I mean, obviously with those volumes of numbers, you're like, okay, this is an obvious problem. But if the people benefiting from it are in charge of investigating it, it doesn't seem like there's going to be anything to be done with it. So I guess really 2 questions. Am I stating that correctly? And if I am, how do you overcome that personal feeling of helplessness in fighting this beast that's in front of you?
Great questions. Number 1, yes, you have identified the problem correctly.
Sorry.
Number 2, there is a solution. There is an incredible opportunity that we have as citizens, and I'll explain it, because I agree. Otherwise, it would be utterly helpless, and I would not get out of bed every morning and fight. I would just go back to, I don't have goats and milk right now. Believe me, if I didn't think there was a remedy, I would have 10 goats and milk right now. So that would be my focus. I'm going to kind of walk through a couple of different elements of this. So again, just to review, voting rights are civil rights. When Congress passed the National Voter Registration Act and said the voter lists have to be accurate, that's not an election law. It is a law upholding a fundamental civil right, the central civil right of every American. What does that mean? It means if the voter lists are not accurate, you have standing.
Okay.
First. Okay. Second is this research project in New York, and now with United Sovereign Americans, we're in 22 states. We have 10 states with completed election validity scorecards. So I know, and we know inside of United Sovereign Americans, how many registration violations and voting violations there were in 2022 in Illinois, Ohio, Texas, California, Florida, North Carolina, Maryland, Missouri, and I'm forgetting, Colorado. I always
Okay.
forget Colorado. So we have all of that information and it's evidence. It's not just statistics, it's evidence because it's obtained and extracted directly from a document that election officials are required to keep accurate under federal law as a matter of civil rights. So inaccuracy inside of the voter roll database cannot be excused under any circumstances. It constitutes intent under that Supreme Court ruling I said in Ray Coy from 1888. They say if you didn't follow the law, that's all that matters. That's criminal intent. And ignorance of the law, arrogance around the law, denying or ignoring the law, or malice, obviously, none of those constitute a valid excuse for gross misconduct. And the last thing is that the reason that we have done this work in all of these states, the reason that Harry and I founded United Sovereign Americans wasn't because running New York Citizens Audit wasn't really enough of a challenge, and being in the most adversarial environment in the country, frankly, other than maybe California, and talking about elections, that just wasn't a big enough hurdle for me personally. It was because we had to create these data sets in state after state. And here is the pathway for the citizens of the United States, because just like you said, everyone else is conflicted. Election officials have a vested interest in continuing to use the system as it stands because they don't want to be accountable for the idea that it may have erred, and they get a paycheck. Elected officials have a conflicted interest because they were elected through this system, and therefore they believe it was correct and accurate because they won, right? So they know that they were the right candidate, and that's what, that was the outcome. So they have complete faith in the system. The only people who don't have faith in the system are the people who thought by all accounts they should have won and they didn't. And then, of course, the citizens who are looking at this system and saying, this is a train wreck. We're the ones who are not conflicted. We can't stand around and wait for this to be solved by someone who's conflicted. It's not going to happen. There's no investigation is going to be done in time to stop this from happening again in the 2024 general. So United Sovereign Americans is preparing to file these preliminary injunctions in every state. We have already filed in Maryland. This lawsuit basically says, here's the deal. The law says the voter rolls have to be accurate. In Maryland, it's smaller. We have 79,000 registration violations, and they voted in the tens of thousands. We have 88,000 blank ballots run through the system. And we have an error rate, an accuracy requirement under federal law for the voting system that has been trampled, right? I think in Maryland, it was probably some allowed like 30 ballots in error, and they had 27,000 ballots in error. So the question is, the system is wildly out of compliance. The process of validating and verifying identity of voters is out of control. And that's literally a quote from the lawsuit. It says, the defendants, the Maryland State Board of Elections, have lost control of the voting system. And the accuracy requirements are being trampled, and no one has any reason to trust the outcomes of any of these elections. I'll give you an example from Missouri. The voting error rate at the time of certification of Missouri's midterm was 27%. 1 in 4 ballots or votes when that election was certified had an open question about its validity. And there were congressional races in the state of Missouri with a margin of victory of 12%. So no matter what, you can't, there's no logical or legal reason to trust that result. The system can't tell you who won. Again, it's going back to what I said earlier. I don't have any idea who won these elections. I don't have any idea who won an election in New York or Missouri or North Carolina or Illinois. The problem is The election officials don't know either. And that's the central argument of these lawsuits that says they can't, these voting systems fundamentally abridge Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution and the 14th Amendment, Section 2. There's a massive abridgment here. Nobody knows who won, and they certify regardless. That's your Achilles heel. You identified the Gordian knot, right? Absolutely. How do you slice the Gordian knot like Alexander the Great? It's right at the moment of certification, because when an official in the United States of America certifies an election, they are attesting officially and personally to the accuracy and legal compliance of everything regarding the administrative process of that election. If you did that on your taxes, what do they call it? Perjury. If you do that on a federal election, if you didn't know that everything was accurate and you didn't know that everything was compliant and you said so anyway, you lied. If you did know that it wasn't accurate and you did know it wasn't compliant and you said so anyway, you lied. There's no way out. So that's what these lawsuits are about. And we want to file them in, we're ready to file in 9 federal circuits. Why did we go through all this time and trouble? This is millions and millions of dollars worth of research effort, volunteered free of charge from the blood, sweat, and tears of the American people who will not allow this country to be stolen. Because if you have a difference of opinion across federal circuits, the matter is immediately forced to the Supreme Court for adjudication. They cannot deny this matter. They have to deal with it. And when it's a matter, again, that is it's a preliminary injunction, so it's an emergency litigation. They have to hear it right away. It's based on one document, the state voter roll database. That database is protected by the most stringent security, cybersecurity and civil rights laws in America. And so discovery is limited. This is a fast litigation process in all reality, in all likelihood. That's what we anticipate. The problem that we're having, just to be absolutely frank, is that we don't have enough money and we don't have enough lawyers. The research is done. The evidence is ready in 10 states. And we've completed this process, and we need buy-in from the American people to say, we're going to give one more shot. We're going to make one more try. I know people are desperate that the courts are lost and you can't get a fair shake and you can't get a fair trial. You know what? If that's what you think, pack your bags and go get the bottom bunk at the COVID camp, because that's it. America's over, take care of yourself then. But my feeling is if 1 million people say, hey, let's give this one more thing a shot, and everybody throws in a 20, we can file all of these lawsuits and we can win this. But we have to believe in ourselves.
So these lawsuits that you're doing, and I have a law background, so I'm understanding when you're talking about injunctions and all this other stuff. But for people out there who may not understand how this works, what you're attempting to do is you're not sitting there saying, oh, look at 2022 and I proved 22 is wrong and woe is me. You're trying to say, okay, look at the data that I've collected all the way up from 22 to this, so that we have to get this fixed before 24. Is that an easy summary for people to understand?
Exactly. And
And if you don't have, so
hard
if there are
evidence.
lawyers listening to this that can take this case pro bono, that would be extremely helpful to you in order to help you with this process. Am I right?
You know what? I'm kind of over pro bono attorneys, and I don't mean to sound negative about the idea of people chipping in and giving their time and their skills, but I've been dealing with pro bono attorneys since November, and what happens is that they want to help, and then they actually realize how much work this is and how much is on the line. They can't come in casually, willy-nilly, and just get something
Right.
filed. They have to understand it, and it's deep. It took Harry and I 3 years looking through this data and reading, dozens and dozens, hundreds maybe of settled lawsuits in the federal circuits, in the Supreme Court, reading the Federal Prosecution of Election Offenses guidebook for U.S. attorneys, studying state law. This is not a trivial process. And what I've discovered is that people come in and they want to help and they look at it for about 2 weeks. Then the next week they think about it, and then they spend 3 weeks hemming and hawing, and then they tell you they're just too darn busy. And meanwhile, 6 weeks has passed that the American people are not getting a remedy. So I'm not into the pro bono idea. I want money and I want to pay people to do this because that's how you get people to do the job. You pay them. That's it.
You know,
Everyone else in
I
United Sovereign Americans I'm a volunteer. Harry's a volunteer. We're all volunteering, but it's not working with pro bono attorneys. So let's just chip in $20 and get this done.
You know, I've actually within the last 4 weeks, I've fired two attorneys that are representing me on other issues for something similar where they're like, well, it just wasn't worth my time. And I'm like, well, you could have at least told me. Long before this process, I guess, you know, attorney, this is the thing that just, I mean, it angers me with these attorneys doing what you're just telling me they're doing, because attorneys know better than anybody the importance of our rights, the importance of our laws, the importance of this. We live off of it. I mean, unfortunately, many attorneys are so legalistic they can't think outside of the foundation of these laws that you're talking of. And to allow this to happen goes against the whole premise that you learn in your first year of law school. So for them to say, oh, well, it's not worth my time, I'm not getting enough money, that's pathetic. And for those attorneys that out there who did that to you, I'm sorry, they're just flat wrong. And they have,
Right.
that's just awful. But
Yeah,
anyway,
it's
that's
unfortunate.
my
I
little
get it,
rant on it.
but we have, only whatever now, 7 months or something until election. So I don't have time to be upset about people's confusion or choices. I really don't. We just have to get this done. And
Right.
so if they want to come back and help, fine. But what we need is money to pay the people who want to work on it now. And there are people there available. And we just need to be able to compensate them because it's not a 10-hour project. It's a 500-hour project. And then you see the trials of Jeff Clark. You see the trials of, the disbarment trials for um, John Eastman, the way that Rudy Giuliani's law license was stripped. It's intimidating. There's no question. It's intimidating. And people aren't sure, do I really want to take this risk? What if it doesn't work and I end up in prison? I'm sure they have all these questions in their head. So I don't want to, I'm not here to attack anybody or downplay anybody's concerns. I just want to put these pieces together and get this done because we're running out of time.
Okay, well, you may be nicer than me about it because, frankly, if you're not willing, if you swear an oath to perform and to abide by the laws when you become an attorney, and yet at the same time you want to sit there and say, well, I'm afraid that I might go to jail or they might come after me. I'm so thankful that our founding fathers didn't have that same weak, pathetic mindset of that. So that's, again, that's my opinion. That's not yours. You're here helping though that other people listening can raise money so that we can find attorneys that are willing to do something like this. How do they donate, and how do they donate, and what can they do to help you would be able to get this? Because you're right, it is urgent. We got 2024 is right around the corner, and we got to make certain this gets taken care of, at least alleviated, if not completely solved.
So the main website for United Sovereign Americans is uniteforfreedom.com, unite number 4 freedom.com, and you can make a contribution there. You can also sign up to volunteer there. You can go to the Learn More page and pick up a couple of short videos that you can share on your social media to help get this word out to more and more of the American people, your friends and neighbors, your family. Because we don't have the media, we have to reach them through wonderful and generous podcasters like Peter, who allow us to come on and talk about this. So if you come in to volunteer, there's a wonderful way that you will be asked and offered to help, because the lawsuits are one aspect of the United Sovereign American strategy, but helping our officials at every level of government to understand what constitutes a valid federal election and how our voting system has become hopelessly broken by invalidity is a process that every American can get involved in. We have created a resolution for a valid 2024 election that outlines the principles of laws I've been talking about here and outlines the data invalidity issues in your state and calls for a remedy that would allow potentially the voting system as it exists to be used, as long as it can be brought into compliance and create auditable records at every junction that are allowed to be viewed by, at a bare minimum, qualified and experienced auditors, third party. Now, if you want to participate in that process, we have a training program for it. It's super fun. The document itself takes about 3 to 5 minutes to read. And then we have scripts around it. And what people do, they just did their first one yesterday in Florida. It was awesome in Palm Beach County. They went to the county commissioners meeting. And what people do is they go in a group of 5 or 6 people, and everybody takes one piece of the script, and you read the whole thing into the record, and you ask your officials, after educating them about what election validity means, you ask them to sign on in support of a valid election for 2024. And the idea is to put pressure on all the officials to deal with this in a way that is not about party, and it's not about a candidate. It's about civil rights and accuracy, and the requirement of accuracy so that we can continue to have a government that protects our natural rights instead of trampling them.
Right.
So it's really fun, and people actually, they start to feel a lot more hopeful and positive because they get an opportunity to meet with other people who also are willing to get up off the couch and get involved, get invested, and learn more about our process and our history in the United States of America around elections. It's actually very uplifting, which in and of itself is a remedy, because everybody feeling discouraged and down and afraid is exactly what our adversary wants. They want us to believe there's nothing we can do. We just have to sit back and watch our country slide into oblivion. That couldn't be further from the truth. So again, the website is uniteforfreedom.com, unite4freedom.com, and go over there. If you can't volunteer, contribute your $20, your part that you can give, or more if you can give more, and let's get this country fixed before the 2024 election. Let's get this issue remedied before they take this country from us forever.
Well, I'm looking at your website now. I pulled it up while you were uniteforfreedom.com with the number 4, and it's really easy to navigate. So for everybody, looking at it on how to donate, it's very easy to do. How to volunteer, join the team, and there's also some other great information on here about of how to keep informed of what's going on. Stuff. I mean, your website's great on it. Very simple, very easy. So again, I encourage everybody to go to that. Marly, thank you so much for what you're doing. Again, what you're doing, whether or not people may agree with you or disagree with you, what you're doing is for all of them, whether they even recognize it or not. And so again, I do appreciate it. And I hope again that people are out there can help get this in front of the courts and move forward with it, because you're right, we have a broken system, and people like you that are willing to fix it instead of just complain about it on social media is encouraging. So thank you so much. I do appreciate all you're doing.
Thanks, Peter. It's been an honor to come on, and I hope we'll talk again when we have some updates. When we get that litigate, all the different states are filed. I want to come on and thank everybody for their $20.
That'll be perfect. That'll be good. That'll be good. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. In Acts 5, we see that when Peter and the other disciples were ordered to stop talking about Jesus, they responded, "We obey God and not man." In 2020, we saw something we never thought we could see in this country. They shut down our churches. After decades of removing God from schools and public institutions, they went straight at our community. Unfortunately, we as Christians did not know what to do. And even worse, we chose to listen to false prophets masquerading as Christians on how to respond. I recognize this is the only beginning, and we need to know how to respond. We have a duty to say no to unjust laws, but as Christians, we have a greater duty to God. In my book on the duty of Christian civil disobedience, I use biblical teachings to help believers know when and how to stand up to those in charge when they ask us to commit evil. You can go to peterdemas.org to find out about our duty to say no. And when you type in the code UNCOMMON, you can get 10% off your order. That's uncommon at peterdemas.org. Remember, we are to obey God and not man. Benjamin Franklin said, man will ultimately be governed by God or by tyrants. When we see abuses within our democratic power, we see that we're no longer being governed by God, that we're being governed by people who are being controlled by their own principles, by their own feelings of power, and that's part of the problem is that whenever you're dealing with any type of politics, whenever you're dealing with it from a citizen's perspective or a Christian perspective, we have to recognize that until we are governed by principles, and as long as we're governed by principles, then we will begin to flourish, and we will begin, and everybody has opportunities that are before them. But as soon as we no longer are governed by principles, and we're governed by power, and we're governed by people who will thrive under that power, then they will do whatever they can to maintain and keep their power by stripping it away from everybody else, little at a time, because anything that is a threat to their power all of a sudden becomes a threat to them. And as far as their self-preservation, they're going to do whatever they can to maintain their power. To do so, they're going to be putting down other people that are around them. So we either have to make the decision every single time that it comes up to vote of who we're voting for and why we're voting for them. But as soon as somebody gets into that position that they're going to be able to manipulate and change our democratic system that has worked for hundreds of years, as soon as that happens, then all of a sudden we no longer have that ability to get rid of those people that might create problems for everybody else. And unfortunately, a lot of times people in politics, some people go for the right reasons and get corrupted. Some people go for the right reasons and stay pretty decent. And some people go strictly for the wrong reasons. And if those people there are people that we have to be able to eliminate as fast as we possibly can. But if they are controlling who gets put in, and if they're being controlled in that area, or at least tipping the scales so that they can stay in power, then all of a sudden now we no longer have that ability to do so. And even though we may feel like we're free, we're not necessarily free. It's the same principle as we may feel like we have a lot of choices of what companies we buy cereal from when we go to the grocery store. But when you look at the cereal aisle, you only got a couple of big brands that just change the colors of the cereal and change the cartoon character that's on the front of the box. We are kind of being stuck in that same situation here as long as our elections are not free. For someone like Marly to take on a project of this magnitude and this size, we really do need to stand up and stand beside her. And for those of you who have legal experience and I encourage you to reach out to her, find out how you can help, because you understand the importance of the laws. You understand the importance of why we have to have these type of protections more than anybody. I mean, we're trained that from the moment you go into law school as a 1L all the way through the process. It is not about you making money. It's about something greater than that. And once we kind of see that we can do something greater than that, the money will likely follow. But you have to step out on that limb. You have to be able to step out and be brave on it. I'm tired of people not wanting to speak out, wanting to hide behind things. And that's exactly what's going on. We recognize there's a problem, but I want to leave it up for somebody else. Well, again, we can't make systematic changes, and we're allowing people who are corrupt and people who are in power to be able to manipulate us to stay down so that they can keep their power. We need to stop that, and we need to stop it now. So if you like this type of programming, comment below. Let me know. Follow me. Do whatever you can. But right now, I really want to encourage you, because again, the time is near. Go to uniteforfreedom.com and donate. Reach out to them, volunteer, whatever it is that you can do, because this is something that is very critical, and I really encourage you to do so. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you again.